Have you ever wondered why a book written more than 2,500 years ago is still studied by military generals, CEOs, entrepreneurs, professional athletes, and even world leaders? Think about that for a moment. Thousands of books have been written over the centuries. Most have faded into history. Yet, The Art of War continues to influence some of the world's most successful people. Why? Because despite its title, this isn't really a book about war. It's a book about strategy. It's about making better decisions. It's about understanding people. It's about avoiding unnecessary conflict. And most importantly, it's about winning before the battle even begins. Whether you're building a business, negotiating a salary, competing in sports, leading a team, or simply trying to make smarter decisions in everyday life, the lessons from this ancient masterpiece are surprisingly relevant. Sun Tzu believed that victory rarely belongs to the strongest person. It belongs to the person who prepares better, the person who thinks further ahead, the person who understands both the situation and themselves. That's why this book has survived for over 2 millennia, while countless others have been forgotten. Its principles don't depend on technology. They don't depend on trends. They depend on human nature. And human nature hasn't changed much. People still let emotions control their decisions. They still underestimate their competitors. They still act before thinking. They still waste energy fighting battles that should never have been fought. The people who succeed aren't necessarily smarter, they're simply more strategic. One of the biggest misconceptions about success is that it comes from working harder than everyone else. But if hard work alone guaranteed success, every construction worker would become a millionaire. Every athlete who trained the hardest would win every championship. Every entrepreneur working 18 hours a day would build a billion-dollar company. Clearly, that's not how life works. Effort matters, but direction matters even more. Imagine climbing a ladder as fast as you possibly can. Now imagine discovering, after years of climbing, that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. All that effort, all those sacrifices, all that time, and yet you still ended up in the wrong place. That's exactly what happens when people confuse activity with strategy. Sun Tzu teaches us something incredibly simple, but incredibly powerful. Before taking action, stop and ask yourself one question. Is this the right battle to fight? Most people never ask that question. Instead, they react. Someone criticizes them online. They immediately respond. A competitor lowers their prices. They panic and lower theirs too. A coworker challenges their ideas. They argue just to prove they're right. But winning every argument doesn't mean you're winning in life. Sometimes the smartest move is walking away. Imagine two business owners. The first spends weeks arguing with an unhappy customer over a small refund. Emails, phone calls, lawyers, stress, distraction. Meanwhile, the second business owner refunds the money immediately, learns from the mistake, and spends those same weeks improving the business and serving hundreds of happy customers. Who really won? The first person may have won the argument, but the second person won something much more valuable: time, energy, focus. Sun Tzu reminds us that every battle has a cost. Not just financial costs, emotional costs, mental costs, opportunity costs. Every hour spent fighting the wrong battle is an hour you cannot invest in building something meaningful. That's why successful people become extremely selective about where they invest their attention. They don't try to win everything. They focus on winning what actually matters. This idea becomes even more important when you realize that life is full of invisible battles. The battle against procrastination, the battle against fear, the battle against distractions, the battle against self-doubt. Most of these battles aren't fought against other people, they're fought inside our own minds. And that's where The Art of War becomes much more than a military manual. It becomes a guide for mastering yourself. Because before you can lead a company, before you can lead a team, before you can influence others, you must first learn to control your own emotions, your own impulses, and your own decisions. Sun Tzu believed that discipline beats raw talent, a calm mind beats an emotional one, and careful planning beats reckless action almost every single time. That may sound obvious, but look around. How many people make important decisions while angry? How many quit jobs without a plan? How many start businesses without understanding the market? How many invest money simply because everyone else is doing it? Most failures don't happen because people lack intelligence. They happen because people act before they think, and according to Sun Tzu, that's one of the fastest paths to defeat. The greatest victories are rarely dramatic. They're often quiet. They're the result of preparation that nobody sees. They're the result of patience that nobody applauds. They're the result of hundreds of small decisions made correctly, long before anyone notices the outcome. That's why strategy always comes before action. And that's where the next lesson begins. Because according to Sun Tzu, every victory is decided long before the battle ever starts. If there's one lesson that appears again and again throughout The Art of War, it's this: victories are rarely created during the battle. They're created long before it begins. That idea may seem surprising at first. After all, when we watch sports, movies, or documentaries, we usually focus on the action itself. We admire the final shot, the winning goal, the successful business launch, the championship trophy, but we almost never see the months or even years of preparation that made those moments possible. Sun Tzu believed that preparation is what separates those who hope to win from those who expect to win. Imagine two students preparing for the same final exam. The first waits until the last week to start studying. The second spends months reviewing the material, practicing difficult questions, and identifying weak areas before the exam even approaches. When test day arrives, they may spend the same 2 hours in the classroom, but the outcome was decided long before either of them picked up a pencil. Life works the same way. A successful negotiation begins before the first handshake. A successful presentation begins before you walk onto the stage. A successful business begins long before the first customer makes a purchase. Preparation creates confidence, and confidence changes everything. Think about the last time you felt completely prepared for something important. Maybe it was an interview, an exam, a speech, a competition. You probably walked into the room differently. You spoke differently. You made decisions differently. Preparation didn't just improve your skills, it changed your mindset. That's why strategic people spend more time preparing than reacting. Unfortunately, most people do the opposite. They wait for problems to appear before thinking about solutions. They start saving money only after losing their job. They begin exercising after receiving bad health news. They learn new skills only when their career is already in trouble. Sun Tzu encourages us to reverse that way of thinking. Prepare before you need to. Strengthen yourself before life tests you, because once the battle has started, your options become much more limited. Preparation isn't about expecting the worst. It's about being ready for whatever comes. This mindset also explains why successful people seem calm during difficult situations. It's not because they never experience fear. It's because they've already imagined different scenarios before they happened. They've asked themselves questions like, what if this project fails? What if the market changes? What if my biggest client leaves? Instead of hoping problems never come, they prepare for them. And when challenges finally appear, they don't panic. They adapt. Another timeless lesson from Sun Tzu is that information is one of the greatest advantages anyone can possess. Before making an important decision, gather as much useful information as possible. Don't assume. Don't guess. Don't rely on rumors. Research. Observe. Ask questions. Imagine you're thinking about starting a restaurant. One person rents a building immediately because they love cooking. Another spends several months studying the neighborhood, analyzing competitors, understanding customer preferences, calculating costs, And speaking with experienced restaurant owners, both have passion, but only one has a strategy. Passion without preparation often leads to disappointment. Preparation turns passion into results. This principle applies everywhere. Before accepting a new job, learn about the company. Before investing your money, understand what you're investing in. Before entering a partnership, understand the other person's values and intentions. Knowledge reduces unnecessary risk. And the less uncertainty you face, the better your decisions become. Sun Tzu wasn't teaching people to become fearful. He was teaching them to become prepared. There's a huge difference. Fear causes hesitation. Preparation creates confidence. One keeps you frozen. The other allows you to move forward with clarity. Perhaps that's why so many successful entrepreneurs spend countless hours studying markets before launching products. Professional athletes analyze hours of game footage before competitions. Top chess players study thousands of historical matches. None of them rely on talent alone. They rely on preparation. Because talent may win a few battles, preparation wins wars. And once you've prepared yourself as much as possible, the next challenge becomes even more important. You must learn to understand not only yourself, but the people standing on the other side of the battlefield. One of the most famous quotes from The Art of War says, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." This simple sentence has been quoted for centuries because it captures one of the greatest truths about success. Most people spend their lives studying everyone else. They watch their competitors. They compare themselves to friends. They follow trends. They imitate successful people. But very few take the time to truly understand themselves. And that's where many failures begin. Think about a business owner who copies everything a successful competitor does. They launch the same products, use similar advertisements, even design a similar website. Months later, nothing works. Why? Because strategies aren't universal. What works for one person may fail completely for another. Every business has different strengths, different customers, different resources, different challenges. That's why Sun Tzu believed that self-awareness is just as important as intelligence. You must know your strengths, but you must also know your weaknesses. Ignoring your weaknesses doesn't make them disappear. It simply makes them more dangerous. Imagine a boxer entering the ring without realizing he always drops his left hand. His opponent will notice it within seconds, and sooner or later, that weakness will cost him the fight. Life works exactly the same way. Maybe you're excellent at creating ideas, but terrible at staying organized. Maybe you're an incredible designer, but struggle with sales. Maybe you're highly disciplined, but avoid taking risks. There's nothing wrong with having weaknesses. Everyone does. The real mistake is pretending they don't exist. The strongest leaders aren't the ones who can do everything themselves. They're the ones who understand where they add the most value and aren't afraid to ask for help in the areas where they don't. But knowing yourself is only half of the equation. You also need to understand the people you're dealing with, whether you're applying for a job, negotiating a contract, building a business, or leading a team. One question should always be in the back of your mind. What does the other person actually want? This sounds obvious, yet most people never ask it. Imagine walking into a job interview. Many candidates spend the entire interview talking about themselves, their degrees, their experience, their achievements. But the interviewer isn't primarily interested in hearing your life story. They're trying to solve a problem. They need someone who can help the company grow, someone who can solve challenges, someone who makes their job easier. The candidates who stand out are the ones who understand that. Instead of saying, "Here's why I'm amazing," they say, "After researching your company, I noticed you're facing these challenges. Here's how I believe I can help solve them." Do you see the difference? The focus shifts from yourself to the other person's needs. That's exactly what Sun Tzu teaches. Understanding your opponent isn't about manipulation. It's about perspective. It's about seeing the situation through their eyes. Great negotiators do this. Great leaders do this. Great entrepreneurs do this. They spend more time listening than talking, more time observing than assuming, because every decision leaves clues. Every action reveals priorities. Every conversation provides information. The people who pay attention always gain an advantage. Another mistake people make is underestimating those around them. Confidence is valuable. Overconfidence is dangerous. History is filled with leaders who believed victory was guaranteed. They ignored warning signs, dismissed competitors, stopped preparing, and eventually lost everything. Success has a strange way of making people comfortable. Comfort leads to complacency. Complacency leads to mistakes. Sun Tzu warns us never to underestimate the situation simply because things are going well today. Instead, remain curious. Continue learning. Continue improving. Continue observing. The moment you believe you know everything is often the moment you stop growing. And that's when someone else quietly prepares to overtake you. The greatest strategists never stop learning because they know the battlefield is always changing. New technologies appear. Markets evolve. People's habits change. What worked yesterday may not work tomorrow, which leads to another timeless lesson from The Art of War. The people who survive and succeed are rarely the strongest. They're the ones who adapt the fastest. Change is one of the few things in life that is guaranteed. Markets change. Technology changes. Relationships change. Careers change. Even the goals you have today may be completely different 5 years from now. Yet despite knowing this, most people resist change. They become attached to routines that no longer serve them. They continue using strategies that worked in the past, even when the world around them has completely transformed. Sun Tzu believed this was one of the greatest mistakes a leader could make. He often compared strategy to water. Think about water for a moment. Water never fights a mountain. It never argues with a rock. It simply flows around every obstacle until it finds another path. That's why water is so powerful. Not because it's rigid, but because it's adaptable. According to Sun Tzu, the best strategists think the same way. They don't become emotionally attached to one plan. They become committed to one objective, and if one path no longer works, they simply find another. Imagine two entrepreneurs. Both launch an online business. After 6 months, the first realizes customers aren't interested in his product. But instead of listening to the market, he insists, "People just don't understand my idea." He continues spending money on advertising, keeps ignoring feedback, refuses to change. Eventually, the business fails. The second entrepreneur faces the exact same problem, but instead of defending the original idea, she starts asking questions. What are customers actually looking for? What problems are they trying to solve? What feedback am I receiving over and over again? She adjusts the product, changes the marketing, improves the customer experience. Months later, the business begins to grow. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was adaptability. One person fought reality, the other learned from it. This lesson extends far beyond business. Think about your career. Many people spend years developing one specific skill. Then technology changes. Artificial intelligence automates part of their work. New software replaces old methods. Entire industries evolve. Some people panic because they built their identity around doing things one particular way. Others see change as an opportunity to learn something new. Years later, they're the ones leading the next generation. The same principle applies to investing, to parenting, to leadership, to communication, to life itself. The people who thrive aren't always the smartest or the strongest. They're the ones who continue adapting while everyone else clings to yesterday. Another fascinating lesson from The Art of War is that flexibility should never be confused with weakness. Some people believe changing your mind means admitting failure. Sun Tzu saw it differently. He believed refusing to change despite new information was the real weakness. Imagine a ship crossing the ocean. The captain sets a destination before leaving port, but he doesn't expect the wind to remain the same throughout the entire journey. Storms appear, currents shift, weather changes. If the captain stubbornly refuses to adjust the sails because he wants to follow the original plan exactly, the ship may never reach its destination. Great captains don't abandon the destination, they adjust the route. Successful people do exactly the same thing. Their goals remain clear. Their methods remain flexible. This mindset also makes failure much less frightening. When you're adaptable, failure isn't the end of the journey. It's simply new information. Every mistake teaches you something. Every setback reveals another strategy that doesn't work. Every obstacle forces you to become more creative. That's why some people become stronger after failure, while others give up. The event is often the same. The interpretation is completely different. Sun Tzu teaches us that every obstacle contains valuable information. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this situation trying to teach me?" That single question changes everything. It transforms frustration into curiosity, fear into preparation, failure into experience. And perhaps that's the greatest advantage any strategist can develop, because life will always be unpredictable. You cannot control every circumstance. You cannot predict every challenge. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. But you can control how quickly you adapt, and in the long run, adaptability almost always beats stubbornness. Which brings us to one final lesson that ties the entire book together. Because after understanding preparation, self-awareness, and adaptability, Sun Tzu leaves us with perhaps the most important insight of all. True victory begins with mastering yourself. At the heart of The Art of War lies one final truth that connects every lesson we've explored. Before you can defeat any external challenge, you must first learn to master yourself. This may sound simple, but it's one of the hardest things anyone can do. Most people believe their biggest obstacles are outside of them. A difficult boss, a weak economy, strong competitors, bad luck. But Sun Tzu encourages us to look in a different direction. He suggests that our greatest enemy is often the one we see in the mirror. It's our impatience that causes us to quit too early. It's our ego that prevents us from accepting advice. It's our fear that stops us from taking opportunities. It's our pride that keeps us from admitting mistakes. And it's our emotions that cloud our judgment when clear thinking matters most. Imagine a captain steering a ship through a violent storm. If he panics, the crew panics. If he loses control, the ship loses direction. But if he remains calm, thinks clearly, and makes thoughtful decisions, everyone on board has a much better chance of reaching safety. Leadership begins with emotional control. The same principle applies to every area of life. When the stock market crashes, some investors sell everything out of fear. Others remain calm, follow their strategy, and recognize opportunities that emotional investors can't see. When an entrepreneur receives criticism, one person takes it personally and gives up. Another listens carefully, learns from the feedback, improves the product, and comes back stronger. The event is exactly the same. The outcome is completely different. The difference isn't intelligence, it's emotional discipline. Sun Tzu understood something that modern psychology continues to confirm today. The person who controls their emotions usually controls the situation. That doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means refusing to let them make your decisions. Fear can warn you. Anger can motivate you. Excitement can inspire you. But none of them should be driving the car. Your judgment should. This is why successful leaders often appear remarkably calm during moments of chaos. It's not because they don't feel pressure. It's because they've trained themselves to think before reacting. That habit alone can change the course of a business, a relationship, or even a life. Another lesson that stands out in The Art of War is humility. The greatest strategists never believe they've learned everything. They remain students. They observe. They ask questions. They adapt. The moment you think you've mastered everything is often the moment you stop growing. History is filled with talented people who became overconfident after a few victories. They stopped preparing. They ignored warning signs. They underestimated their competition. Eventually, success turned into failure. Sun Tzu reminds us that every victory should make us wiser, not more arrogant, because no matter how experienced you become, there's always something new to learn. There's always another perspective to consider, another skill to develop, another mistake to avoid. That's what keeps great leaders growing year after year. So, what is the ultimate message of The Art of War? It's not that life is a battlefield where everyone is your enemy. It's the opposite. The book teaches us to avoid unnecessary conflict whenever possible, to think before acting, to prepare before competing, to adapt instead of resisting change, to understand others without forgetting to understand ourselves, and above all, to realize that the smartest victory is often the one that requires the least fighting. Whether you're building a business, pursuing a career, managing your finances, strengthening your relationships, or simply trying to become a better version of yourself, these lessons remain just as powerful today as they were more than 2,000 years ago. That's why The Art of War has never truly been a book about war. It's a book about wisdom, a book about decision-making, a book about leadership, and perhaps most importantly, a book about mastering yourself before trying to master the world. If there's one lesson to remember from this timeless classic, let it be this: your greatest victories won't come from overpowering others. They'll come from preparing wisely, thinking strategically, adapting constantly, and becoming the kind of person who stays calm when everyone else loses control. Because in the end, success doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the most prepared, the most disciplined, and the most strategic. If you enjoyed this summary and want to discover more timeless books on success, business, psychology, wealth, and personal growth, make sure to subscribe. Every week, we break down the world's greatest books into practical lessons you can apply to your own life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.